fellow authors. Welcome to another episode of I'll Read That, the show where your stories get heard. So, if you're new to the channel, or if you don't know what the premise is, I read your stories live. You submit your unpublished stories, your novels, your short stories, your poems, anything you want read. I do a cold read and add a little fun to it. All these are cold reads. So, your story can be heard for those people out there. It's more of a tool to allow you to listen and experience your story from the viewpoint of your audience. So it helps you as a writer grow, develop, and create. So if you have a story worth reading, if you have something you want to share with everybody else, please send it in, submit it, and I'll read that. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of a divergent, and I'm going to read a book that I wrote, and um, this is actually one of the last drafts that I wrote, and I'm just going to read it before I completely rewrite it. So there is going to be a full rewrite on this, and but I do want the first version to go out and give you guys a taste of exactly what the story could have been or what the story is panning out to be. So again, I am going to do a full rewrite on this eventually. I don't know when I find some time, but I want to get into it. So the book I wrote is called Toby, and I'll talk about it a little bit at the end when I finish reading it. But I want to give you guys just a taste of where I'm coming from. So this is the beginning of my novel, Toby. Prologue. The beginning. It was a cold, wet night in late autumn, and the rain fell in a steady rhythm against the corrugated tin roof of an old abandoned house on the edge of town. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the water dripped in long, thin lines from the eaves. The house, long forgotten by people, had become a sanctuary for things that went unnoticed, a place where broken things ended up, where stray cats prowled, and where shadows settled. Underneath the house, in a small, hidden crawl space, a stray dog lay curled up in a tight ball, her body shivering with effort and exhaustion. Her fur, once a glossy black, was now matted and dull, streaked with mud and debris. Her breaths came in short, quick pants, and her eyes were wide with pain and fear. She had found this place just hours before, instinctively seeking shelter from the storm, and now she lay in the dark, struggling to bring her last litter into the world. Before she became the lean, determined stray who had brought life into this unforgiving alley, her story was one of suffering, survival, and an iron will forged in fire. Her life began in a desolate warehouse just outside a sprawling city in California, a place known for sunshine and surf, but also shadows and secrets. The warehouse was, was a hidden hell, a grim puppy mill operating far from prying eyes. She was one of hundreds packed tightly into wire cages, a nameless, voiceless animal identified only by the number crudely tattooed in her ear, 8. Number 8's first memories were of cold concrete floors and metal bars. She was born into darkness, where sunlight barely filtered through cracked and dirty windows. The air was thick with the scent of waste and despair, a place where even hope seemed to suffocate. There was no warmth, no comfort, only the sounds of desperate whimpers and the shuffling of tiny paws against the metal. The older dogs, their bodies worn and broken, had long since stopped fighting, their eyes hollow and defeated. As soon as she was old enough to eat solid food, the breeding began. She was barely 6 months old when she was forced into her first pregnancy, her small body too young to bear the weight of life. The hands that handled her were rough, unfeeling, and there was no kindness, no care. Each pregnancy drained her more, her body growing thin, her ribs protruding through her fur. She was just given enough food and water to keep her alive, but never enough to truly nourish her. The conditions in the warehouse were horrific, rows upon rows of cages stacked on top of each other, feces and urine dripping from the higher cages onto those below. Number 8's cage was near the bottom, a position that left her perpetually damp and filthy. The stench was unbearable, the noise deafening. Dogs barked, whined, and cried out in pain and hunger. She learned early on that crying did no good, that the mill owner's response to any noise was a swift kick or a harsh yank of the chain. Number Eight's world was filled with endless cycles of fear, pain, and forced breeding. She had little time to recover between pregnancies, her body never allowed to heal. Each cycle left her weaker, but her spirit remained unbroken. The other dogs around her, the ones who lasted, shared her silent suffering. They exchanged glances, brief and knowing, filled with a shared desire to escape. But escape seemed impossible. The warehouse was locked tight, the windows barred, and the outside world felt like a distant dream. One stormy autumn night, everything changed. A violent wind whipped through the cracks in the old building, and rain lashed against the roof. The warehouse was silent except for the sound of dripping water and the low, pitiful moans of the dogs. The mill owner had left earlier than usual, locking the doors behind him, unconcerned about the suffering he left behind. That night the storm turned into something fierce. A bolt of lightning struck the roof, sending a shower of sparks down into the cardboard stacked along the far wall. A small fire ignited, and the flames quickly found purchase in the dry, rotting wood. The fire spread fast, fueled by the debris and waste that filled the corners of the warehouse. Smoke began to billow, thick and acrid, stinging Number Eight's eyes and burning her throat. Panic erupted among the dogs. They howled and barked, clawing at their cages, their eyes wide with terror. Number Eight could feel the heat growing closer, the fire advancing like a living thing, devouring everything in its path. She knew she had to escape. With her belly swollen and heavy with new life, she could feel the puppies inside her moving, their small bodies pressing against her sides. She couldn't die here, not like this, not with her babies inside her. Desperation gave her strength. She threw her body against the rusted metal bars of her cage, again and again, feeling the pain shoot through her legs and shoulders. The cage door creaked, but held firm. She didn't stop. She slammed into it harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps, smoke filling her lungs. Finally, with one last desperate push, the old latch gave way, the door bursting open. Stumbling out, she hesitated for a moment, her legs shaking beneath her. The fire was everywhere, licking up the walls, consuming the wooden beams, and sending sparks flying through the air. She could barely see through the smoke, but she knew she had to move. She darted forward, her body low to the ground, navigating through the maze of cages, dodging falling debris, and leaping over broken planks. The air was so hot it seared her fur, and the smoke was thick, suffocating. Her heart raced, not just from fear, but from the urgency of protecting the life she carried within her. As she ran, she felt a sharp pain in her side. One of the beams weakened by the fire had cracked and fallen, its splinters tearing into her flesh, but she couldn't stop. She kept running, driven by sheer willpower and the instinct to protect her unborn pups. Ahead, she saw it, a small gap where the wall had cracked from the heat. It was narrow, barely large enough for her, but it was her only chance. She forced herself through, squeezing her body against the splintering wood, feeling it scrape against her sides, tearing at her fur. She pushed harder, ignoring the pain, and finally she was out. Cold air rushed over her, a stark contrast to the unbearable heat inside. She stumbled forward, coughing and wheezing, but she didn't stop. The fire roared behind her, consuming the warehouse, but she didn't look back. She ran into the night through the rain and wind, her body aching, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. She ran until she could run no more, her legs giving way beneath her. She found shelter in a cluster of bushes near the edge of a park, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The ground was wet, the cold seeping into her bones, but she curled up as tightly as she could, shielding her swollen belly from the elements. She could feel her pups moving inside her, a tiny flicker of life amid all the death and destruction. She had escaped the fire, but the fight for survival was far from over. For days, Number Eight wandered the outskirts of the city, avoiding people, scavenging for food wherever she could. Her body was weak, her wounds stinging with infection, but she kept moving, driven by an instinct to survive, to protect the lives growing within her. She found temporary shelter in alleys, behind dumpsters and under bridges, her body growing weaker with each passing day. One by one, her puppies were born, each one smaller and weaker than the last. The mother licked them clean, nudging them close to her belly, where they could find warmth and the milk they desperately needed. But as the hours passed, she grew weaker, her body trembling as she fought to keep going. Her breath was shallow, her eyes fluttering, and she knew somehow, instinctively, that she did not have much time left. For the next few weeks, the mother fought to stay alive, driven by a fierce and unyielding love for her newborn puppies. Each day was a struggle to find enough food, warmth, and safety, and the harshness of her surroundings was relentless. She would leave the little she would leave the litter hidden beneath the old abandoned house, venturing out into the cold street to scavenge for scraps. Her legs, already weakened from the months of hardship at the puppy mill, trembled under her weight as she trotted through the alleyways and dumpsters, desperate to find something, anything that could sustain her and her pups. She would return to her puppies, her mouth, her mouth empty more often than not, and collapse beside them. Her breath was labored, her ribs starkly visible beneath her thinning fur, yet each time she lay down, she licked their tiny heads and nuzzled them, offering the only comfort she could. But as the days wore on, she began to notice the change. Her milk was drying up. She had nothing left to give. Hunger gnawed at her bones, and fatigue made every step a challenge. Still she pressed on, unwilling to give in, her maternal instinct driving her to protect her litter at all costs. The nights were the hardest. The cold crept in through every crack and gap, chilling her to the bone. The mother curled around her babies as tightly as she could, trying to shield them from the biting wind, but she could feel her strength ebbing away, her body betraying her with every passing moment. Each night the shivers that ran through her frame grew more violent, her breaths more shallow, yet she clung to hope, clung to the belief that she could somehow keep them alive. One morning she awoke to find one of her pups cold and still, the little body tucked beneath her paw, no longer moving. A soft whimper escaped her, but she could not afford to linger in grief. Her remaining pups needed her. She buried the pain deep within her and continued her routine, dragging her body out into the street to find food. But each day it grew harder to return. Her vision blurred, her steps faltered. Then another puppy grew weaker, its cries more pitiful and less frequent. By the third day, two had gone still. Her heart ached with a deep, crushing sorrow, but she couldn't stop. She returned to the street again, limping now. Her body ached with every step. She found nothing but trash and cold concrete. Days passed, and one by one her babies succumbed to the cold, the hunger, and the relentless march of time. Her spirit began to break. She was aware that she too was growing weaker, her fur thinning, her ribs protruding even more, her eyes becoming dull. She would close her eyes in moments of exhaustion and wonder if she would wake again. Each time she returned, she hoped against hope to see all her puppies still breathing. But it seemed that fate had other plans, cruel and indifferent to her desperate pleas. Eventually only one remained, the runt, the smallest of the litter, a tiny black pup with a thin coat of scruffy fur and floppy ears that seemed too big for its little head. He was different from the others, somehow more determined, more restless. She could feel his heartbeat against her side, rapid and insistent, as if it was fueled by some inner fire that refused to die. He nuzzled into her, searching for milk that was no longer there, his little tongue licking at her, desperate for sustenance. Days turned into a blur of hunger and cold. The mother, barely conscious, still nudged the runt closer to her, trying to give him whatever warmth she had left. She licked his tiny face, her tongue rough and dry, her movements slow and labored. The pain in her body was unbearable now, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She could feel herself slipping away, but she refused to let go. Not yet. Not while he still had a chance. But nature, as always, was cruel. Her time was running out. The light in her eyes began to dim, her breaths more shallow and spaced apart. She turned her head to look at her only surviving puppy, her eyes filled with a mix of love and despair. Her final act of tenderness was a gentle nudge of her nose against his tiny body, a silent farewell and a final gift of warmth. With a heavy heart, the mother lay her head down, closed her eyes, and surrendered at last to the exhaustion and cold. The pup, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded, continued to squirm and wriggle, pushing himself closer to her side, seeking the warmth and comfort he instinctively craved. For days the little runt fought to survive. He clung to his mother's still body, searching for the milk that was no longer there, unaware that she was gone. He was driven by a relentless unseen force, a will to live that was beyond his comprehension. But each day grew colder, and he felt the warmth of his mother fade until it was gone entirely. The world was a vast, frightening place, and he was just a small, helpless creature in it, struggling to stay alive. As the days stretched into nights, and the nights into an endless cycle of cold and hunger, the runt felt his own strength beginning to fade. But even in his weakened state, there was something inside him that refused to die, a spark, a will, a tiny flickering of flame of life. He curled up into a tight ball, shivering and trembling, his small body almost swallowed by the shadows. And in the silence of the night, with only the whispering wind for company, the runt felt something swell within him, a deep, unyielding resolve to survive. His mother's spirit seemed to whisper to him through the darkness, filling him with a fierce determination to fight, to endure, and to live. And so he crawled out from the darkness, his paws slipping on the wet, muddy ground, his nose twitching as he searched for something, anything that could sustain him. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cold, and the sky was a thick blanket of gray. The world was big and frightening, filled with sounds he didn't understand and shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. He stumbled into the daylight, blinking against the sudden brightness, his tiny legs unsteady behind him. The ground was cold and wet against his belly, and he shivered. His ears flattened against his head. He sniffed the air, catching the scent of something he didn't recognize, something sharp and unfamiliar. It was the smell of the town, of people, of things he had never known. He moved forward, driven by the faint, flickering spark of life that still burned inside him. He was small, but his spirit was strong. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he knew he couldn't stay here. The abandoned house that had been his birthplace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a place of death and decay, and he needed to find something else, somewhere else. He wandered through the yard, his nose to the ground, searching for food. There was nothing but wet grass and mud, and he felt the cold seeping into his bones. His belly growled, a deep, painful ache that reminded him of his need, his desperation. He whimpered softly, a sound lost in the vast emptiness of the world around him. For days he wandered, a tiny figure lost in a world too big for him. He found puddles to drink from, his tongue lapping up the cold, dirty water, and once he found a piece of bread, hard and stale, but it filled his stomach and gave him the strength to keep going. He slept wherever he could, curling up under bushes, under the cover of trash or dumpsters in back alleys, his body shivering through the long, dark nights. And as he wandered, he learned. He learned to avoid the big, roaring machines that sped down the streets, their wheels throwing up water and dirt. He learned to stay away from the large, angry dogs that prowled the alleys, their teeth bared and their growls low and menacing. He learned to hide from people, to stay in the shadows because some of them would chase him away, shouting and waving their arms. But he also learned that not all people were the same. Once a woman in a yellow raincoat saw him shivering by the side of the road and tossed him a piece of chicken from her lunch. Another time a child with curly hair tried to pet him, her hand outstretched and her voice soft. He had wanted to go to her, to feel the warmth of her touch, but he had been too afraid, too unsure, so he had run, as he always did, his tiny paws slipping on the wet pavement, his heart pounding in his chest. Days turned into weeks, and still he wandered, searching for something he couldn't name, something he couldn't understand. He had no name, no home, and no one to love him, but he had a spirit that refused to be broken. He was small and fragile, but there was a fire in his eyes, a spark of determination that kept him moving forward, kept him hoping for a better tomorrow. And so, in the town where no one noticed, a little black puppy began his journey. He was alone, but he was not defeated. He was lost, but he was not without hope. And though the world seemed big and frightening, he knew deep down in his heart that he would find his place in it someday. He just had to keep going, to keep searching, and to never, ever give up. The days began to blur together for him. The early morning light would peek through the thick canopy of leaves above, and he would wake, stretching his small, aching body, and continue his search. He was driven by hunger, by the need to survive, but also by something deeper, something he didn't quite understand. He wandered further into town, following his nose and his instincts. The buildings grew taller, the streets wider, and the sounds louder. Cars honked and rumbled by. People shouted to one another across the streets, and the smell of food, garbage, and oil filled the air. It was overwhelming, but he had no choice but to press on. He stayed close to the walls, slinking along the edge of the sidewalks, keeping his eyes down but his ears always alert. Occasionally he would come across other strays, dogs with shaggy coats and wary eyes. Some would sniff him, their tails wagging cautiously, but most would simply growl and chase him away, seeing him as nothing more than a threat to their territory or a rival for food. And so he remained alone, always moving, always searching. He learned to navigate the maze of streets and alleys, to find the places where people left scraps of food and where the trash cans were most likely to overflow. He learned to recognize the safe spots, the quiet corners of the park, the small gap under the fence where he could hide if needed. One night, after a long day of wandering and scavenging, he found himself by the river that ran along the edge of town. The moon was high, casting a silver glow on the water, and the air was filled with the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been, but something about the river drew him in. The sound of the water flowing, the cool breeze on his face. It felt peaceful, almost like home. He sat down by the water's edge, his small body trembling from exhaustion and cold. He dipped his nose into the river, taking a long, cool drink. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm wash over him, a brief moment of relief from the constant hunger and fear. He lay down on the soft grass, his eyes half closed, and listened to the gentle flow of the river. He was alone, but he was alive, and in that moment, that felt like enough. As he drifted off to sleep, his dreams were filled with memories of things he had never known. A warm place, filled with soft voices and gentle hands. A place where he didn't have to be afraid, where there was always food and warmth, where he belonged. He dreamed of running across open fields, his ears flapping in the wind, his tail wagging furiously, and a feeling of joy filling his little heart. But even in his dreams, there was a shadow, a fear that crept in at the edges, a reminder that the world was not always kind, that he was still small, still vulnerable. He whimpered in his sleep, his paws twitching as if running from something he could not see. When he awoke, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale pink glow over the river. His stomach growled, and the ache of hunger returned sharper than ever. He stood up, shaking the dew from his fur, and looking around. The world was waking up, and with it, his determination returned. He could stay by the river forever, or he couldn't stay by the river forever. He needed to keep moving to find food, to find a place where he could belong. He padded back toward the town, his nose to the ground, sniffing for any hint of a meal. As he rounded a corner, he caught sight of a woman walking down the street, a shopping bag in her hand. He hesitated, watching her from the shadows. She looked different from the others. Her face was kind, her steps gentle. She didn't seem like the kind who would chase him away. He took a tentative step forward, his tail wagging ever so slightly. But before he could get closer, a loud bark broke the air. A large dog, a shepherd mix, lunged out from behind a gate, barking furiously. He jumped back, his heart racing, and bolted in the opposite direction. His small paws pounded the pavement as he ran, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps. He ran until he couldn't hear the barking anymore, until he was sure he was safe. When he finally stopped, he was in a part of town he didn't recognize. The buildings were taller here, the streets were more crowded. He crouched low, his ears flat against his head, and looked around, unsure of where to go next. But even as fear gripped his little heart, he felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. He had made it this far, and had survived on his own against all odds. He would keep going, keep fighting, keep searching for the place he knew was out there somewhere, a place where he could find warmth, kindness, and a sense of belonging. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, and took a deep breath. The world was big and frightening, but he was still here, still standing, and in that moment he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, he would never give up, because he was alive, and this was only the beginning of his journey. And that's the end of the prologue. So, it's a very heavy-handed prologue, very dark, very sad. But not to critique myself, it's the untold truths of what's going out there. So, if you enjoyed this, if you hated it, please leave a comment. Like and subscribe. And if you have a story to read, please submit it and allow me to read it. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your words. And as always, if you want to get out there, remember, I'll read that. Thank you all. Appreciate you.
I'll read that, a story to be told. Unpublished words, brave and bold. Chapter by chapter,